But the buffer zone is tried and true with so many students. It's where you cut off work at a certain
Mhm.
point and take a little buffer period to quiet down before you go to sleep. Because I was finding so many students are studying something really edgy in their bed, close the book and try to lay their head down, and they were not
Yeah.
falling asleep. Or they were just busy, busy, busy till 11 p.m. and then all of a sudden they can't sleep. It's like, well,
Yep.
let's talk about how to get, and it can be a 20-minute buffer zone. It doesn't have to be too long, but it's kind of basically quieting down. I also like to recommend that folks will write out like their to-do list for the next day if they're struggling with busy thoughts.
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Keith Edwards. Today, I'm joined by Mia Nosanow, who spent 30 years as a mental health counselor and now has written a new book, The College Student's Guide to Mental Health, to help college students and their families. Mia and I were colleagues together at Macalester College, and I'm so excited for this conversation. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. This episode is sponsored by Rutledge, Taylor & Francis. View their complete catalog of educational titles at rutledge.com/education. This episode is also sponsored by Huron, a global professional services firm that collaborates with clients to put possible into practice. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Keith Edwards. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a speaker, author, and coach, and I help higher ed leaders and organizations make the complex uncomplicated for leadership, learning, and equity. You can find out more about me at keithedwards.com. I'm recording this from my home in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the intersections of the ancestral homelands and current homelands of both the Dakota and the Ojibwe peoples. So Mia, thank you so much for being here and for writing this book and for sharing a little bit about it. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you came to this?
Thank you for having me on your show today. My name is Mia Nosanow. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a licensed psychologist at the master's level. I got my master's degree at the University of Minnesota. And I came a little bit late to mental health. I had a first career in publishing and journalism and television, and realized that what was making me the happiest was when I was mentoring the interns. And so
Mhm.
college age people were always coming to me, and I made a pivot to be a counselor in my 30s and was so lucky to get the counseling job at Macalester. And I do like to mention that I got that when I was 41. To
Mm.
all those out there that are maybe wondering when are they going to get their dream job, like, hold on, sometimes it takes a while. And so I had the honor to work with Keith and a lot of incredible people at Mac for over 20 years, and loved, found it to be a calling, honestly, to work with students who are in need of mental health services.
Mhm.
That's me.
And you got to spend a lot of time at as we were talking before, at the heart of this, right? I spent a lot of time with college students at Macalester, but you were spending these 50-minute in-depth sessions week to week, every other week at the heart of that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's what it looks like. I was always in the trenches with students. My main job was one-on-one counseling. So like you said, 50-minute hours. Sometimes they went 60. I always felt like students were coming to me with their heart in their hand. Maybe I'm the only person that's going to listen, that they can trust to tell their truth to. So very much of an honor and a privilege to be in that position. That's what I did week after week. Not in the summers though. The
Mm-hmm.
MAC is open
Yeah.
in the summer, so I got to do my other job in the summer, which was be a mom. So yeah, I was working so deeply with students, even in the groups. They also
Right. Right.
sharing themselves.
And you were spending most of your time in that kind of therapeutic one-on-one or small group environment. I'm curious what insights you think you got on college students that was different than maybe mine or other administrators in a dean of students office or an RD or career center. It's a really different perspective on the student experience and what they're going through and how they're experiencing college from people who are in more of an administrative role who maybe do a little bit of counseling or a little bit of therapeutic engagement here and there in these moments or in these things. But you're really, like you said, at the heart of it, and they come with their truth.
I think one of the biggest differences from what might happen in a counseling session to what students are doing outside of counseling is that they might take their mask off. And I know you have, that's part
Mm.
of your theory too about men,
Yeah.
that they really do take that mask off, because I would have the experience of maybe running into a student just walking by on campus, and they would be kind of like so together and like being funny. And it would hit me in my heart like, wow, they have a whole thing going on about how they're being outside. And then in my office, they're just going so much deeper into what is going on with them. And that kind of does dovetail into one of the reasons I wrote the book, is that yes, many people were bringing in very hard stories from either family of origin or something that had happened to them, like a sexual assault or some, cultural piece that's extremely difficult. And what a lot of folks were bringing in were became for me themes that happened, they brought in over and over again. And that's what was the impetus for the book, is that half of what folks were bringing in was what I would call developmentally appropriate issues. I
Mm-hmm.
can't sleep right, or I'm having trouble with friends, or my thoughts, my emotions are out of control in this way, but they wouldn't have to be labeled mental illness. They were honestly bringing in just a deeper level of what they were struggling with, that for me was like, yeah, guess what? Everyone is struggling with this. And
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, that's another big theme, is that students often think I'm the only one. I'm the only
Mm-hmm.
one that can't do this. And so then I hopefully was playing a role to say, no, this is people are bringing this to my office all the time. And hopefully they believe me. Because
Yeah.
that's curative in itself, to realize I'm not alone, but it is very hard to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, and just I love this that you would see students sharing very individual, very personalized things, and then you see hundreds or thousands, and you notice patterns, some similar things, and then it's striking to me that you would then see them outside, walking across campus or maybe in the dining hall, and you see this kind of performance or this masking. And now I'm imagining a lot of these students want performing, I got it together, performing, I know what I'm doing, performing, I know what path I'm on, and then going to you and saying I don't, and then you saying, well, like, nobody does. Right? You're not the outlier, you're the norm, right? And if we could just get past some of that, and normalize that and share, like, how don't you have it together? That could be really powerful and opening some of that up. Well, tell us how the book came to be. How did, writing a book is, particularly when you're not doing it in an academic where you have a lot of research and, it's been years kind of informing this. You had a very different experience, sort of pulling from decades of experience. How did it come to be?
I'm I'm just drawn to start with the academic versus how I tried to write the book, which was with no jargon and almost no research in it, which is so opposite of what most academics do. But that is 100% based on wanting to connect with students, because in my office, I always felt you have to use plain language and meet the student where they're at. The minute you bring in something jargony or academic, you put up a wall. I experienced that. So I was like, I do not want a book like that. I want it to just be really real, almost all, as much as I can. Every once in a while, I have a statistic in there just to try to make a point, but very rarely. So that was that was one of the, trying to answer a question how it came about, is wanting to create a resource like that. Because in higher ed, a lot of the resources are more, you know, they're based on research, because that's what we're learning to do as students, which
Right.
is awesome. But for mental health, we want it to, for actual action in mental health, we want it to be really real as much as we can. So that was one thing that was a goal for me. I started writing in 2007, because I was seeing all these themes over and over, and I did not find a resource that put all the themes in one place with actionable strategies for what the theme, I have 35 chapters, what the themes are, what what are the strategies that I was doing that were working with students. So that was what I started to have a vision for and started writing. And I always thought I was too late. As I was, there's already a crisis. There's already a crisis. The crisis that was happening long ago, and then the election of 2016 made a huge mental health crisis. Obviously, well, the first crisis was really I think in 2008, when a lot of people lost financing, that created a crisis for a lot of students. The phones and the social media created a crisis. The election created a crisis. Shootings of young Black men created a crisis across camp for a lot of people. And this is all way before we get to the pandemic, which then created such an obvious crisis, which it almost is a silver lining that it put mental health on the front burner. But this this has been going on for a long time, where students are having so much loneliness, maybe not having the skills to make friends that they used to have. This cohort maybe used to have. I don't even want to put a date on when that was, but more than 20 years ago. Um, Self-care, not as good. Self-talk, managing emotions. These things just haven't, they need to be more overtly taught. And so I tried to create a resource that just gave really practical skills for all these things.
It's interesting you talked about some of these things that are such a moment, like a very particular thing. The murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, where I am and you are near. um, that's a very particular thing that affected a lot of people, and there's other things related to that, or an election. It's just sort of a very particular thing, and then the things that have to happen after that. And then there's other things that are kind of powerful impacts but slow, like smartphones, right? Not everybody got one on the same date, right? That kind of spread over time. And then social media, which sort of started and then became more ubiquitous, and then lots of things happening. And then a pandemic, which was sort of 4 years ago, near almost exactly the day that we're having this conversation.
That's true.
But so then that happened, but then there's the longer term impacts. And you mentioned that when I'm working with a lot of campuses, the theme that I'm hearing is that students now don't have the capacity or the competence, they don't have the social skills, and they don't have the confidence. They don't have the belief in themselves around that. And so part of that is, how do we help them gain the skills, but also how do we help them gain the confidence? And I think that's an interesting dynamic to wrestle with both of that, that a lot of the things going on and overwhelmed by the world and the phone and what they're consuming and social media, and then the realities of the world and what's happening and what they're seeing, and how they're not just reading about it, but seeing video of it, whether that's racial violence, whether that's Ukraine, whether that's Gaza, whether that's the legislation being passed. There's a lot coming at these students.
I would say that's absolutely the big difference now, is so much input and so much expectation for output. Because when I went to college, which was, I'm 64, so in the late 70s, we did not have this kind of output that we were expected, and let alone the input where you're just getting 24/7 images. And it's it's just completely different now for what a young human being is expected to produce or consume. It's so extreme. I think that would be the one thing I would say, and that's not just the fault of smartphones and all that, but it's because the output has nothing to, we're expecting them to be, you know,
Yeah,
busy,
I'd love you to
busy.
say a little bit more about that, because I don't think I understand that. Like, I understand that they're consuming on social media so many things, so much more information, and also so much more visceral information. It's one thing to read about it in a newspaper, 40 years ago. It's another one to see the video images of it and to be bombarded with that constantly. It's a different visceral experience than an intellectual imagining, wondering. Um, so I get the overwhelm by all of the things that are coming at them. Tell us a little bit more about the output expectations being different.
The output would be I mean, how much you're expected to do with going to class, doing your homework, being involved in things on campus, working. A lot of people are working, especially at community college level, and doing doing being busy all the time, trying to,
Mhm.
whether it's sports, all that kind of stuff. It creates, and I just think we have a culture of, if you're taking a break and hanging out, that is frowned upon. Um, just hang out. I
You're
have no
not
goal.
committed,
I'm
right? You're
just
not
gonna
committed to your
hang out and
major.
have
You're
a
not committed to the cause. You're not committed to the issues. You're not committed to what your
great.
identity group. Yeah.
It's I feel that that is still real in our culture. The generation that's just coming to college today, who's been through COVID, maybe are just saying, I can't do this, so I'm not going to do it. But that's not what I'm not sure about that. If there is going to be a change because of, I can barely handle 2 classes, I'm going to go part-time and live at home, like if everyone's going to opt into that. But I
Yeah.
do think in our culture, we just really value, I'm busy all the time. You definitely see it in high school when kids are just packed full. But I
Trying to
saw
get
that
into these colleges so that they can be
trying to
busy
get
all the
in,
time in
and they're
college.
and they're doing stuff that they wouldn't really choose necessarily. That's not like, oh, this speaks to my heart. It's more like, I know I need to do this to tick a box.
Mhm.
So I think there's a problem with, I have a whole chapter in my book on quiet time, how to give yourself some downtime and rest. And
Mhm.
there's a huge movement in our country to do that. But
Yeah.
it's not, I guess it's not huge. There's a burgeoning movement, which
Yeah.
is to yeah, take some downtime, just be alive and be with yourself or be with people or nature.
One of the things that I really appreciate is you said 35 chapters. Sounds a little overwhelming, but they're short. They're really focused. They're really sort of, here's this thing, and also very tactical and helpful. So I'd love to talk with you about some of the key things from the book that you would want to share. Let's start with the quiet. I think so many of us yearn for quiet. We don't feel like we can, and we don't know how. Like, I have this experience. I'm like, I just want some quiet. I just want some quiet. And then the family leaves and I get that quiet time. I'm like, I don't even know what to do now. So you've got some really like concrete suggestions, and it's not prescriptive. It's not like, here's what you
No.
should do. It's here's 7 or 8 different things. What works for you? So tell us a little bit about how we can get some of that quiet that we're yearning for, why it's so important.
Once again, I love that you said there's no right answer. It's whatever speaks to your heart about how to get quiet. But one of my favorite ones is to take a walk with no headphones. Try it.
Uh-huh.
I love podcasts. I'm doing one right now. And there's a space for trying on a walk just to and notice the trees and what the birds might be. The birds are chirping a lot in St. Paul today.
Mhm.
Um, that's one kind of simple one. Um, there's traditional things like trying meditation or trying any kind of prayer that works for you. I'm super open to anything that works for people, as well as if they have a faith and they have specific prayers they like. Um, doing some kind of quiet art
Mhm.
thing, or there's so many ideas.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about nature too. What would you sort of nudge us towards for nature?
It's funny, just kind of any nature is good. Even if you're in a city and you're going to a city park and there's huge buildings around you, if you're in a park where there's grass and trees, touching some of the trees or something, just trying to be in that, or taking a walk outside, that's one of
Mhm.
my, you can tell that's one of my favorites.
Mhm.
It's such a simple thing, but it's helped so many people to say, yeah, I'm gonna plan a walk in my day, in this part of my
Yeah.
day. It gives them
Yeah.
a real break.
I find it's a real difference. I mean, I walk through my neighborhood a lot. Sometimes I'm doing executive coaching calls and focused on that. Sometimes I'm listening to podcasts or music or something like that. And then sometimes I'm not and just paying attention. And there's a real difference. Um, I can do the same loop, but there's a very different experience when I pay attention to the tops of the trees and the clouds. And there are a lot of times where I can make an hour-long loop and not notice the clouds at all, not notice the tops of the trees. But when I do really feel connected to nature, even though I'm in a city. And just the realization that, those trees have been there for 50 years and the problems of my day will come and go and they'll still be there. It just gives you
Mhm.
perspective and connection and a little time out for me.
Well, you mentioned looking up, and I think people have studied, because to look up at the sky is not something most people would do. I think
Oh, I'm usually
over
like this.
history, it's an unusual thing to do. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I can't remember if I mentioned in my book, but actually stopping and looking up changes your brain waves a bit too. And so sitting, you can do this anywhere because the sky is going to be above you 100% of the
Yeah.
places you are if you walk outside.
Mhm.
That will give your mind a break in a way. And just to take that, even it doesn't have to be like, oh, I need to be quiet for 3 hours. You can be quiet for 10 minutes or 5 minutes and get something out of it. The other quietish things that they're not necessarily all college students can do, but I like gardening or doing some kind of thing outside. With yard book or playing with kids outside is still
Mhm.
outside,
Yeah.
it's not always quiet.
I remember one McAllister student who was very accomplished and very impressive. And I was sort of saying, how's it going? And his response was, well, you can be successful academically, you can have a social life, and you can sleep, but you can't do all three. And you've got some really great recommendations on sleep, particularly this little, you call it a barrier space between sleep?
Buffer zone.
Buffer zone. Yes, buffer zone. Tell
Yeah.
us about the buffer zone for sleep.
Yeah, the first section of my book has the quiet chapter and the sleep chapter. It's on taking care of your body, and the sleep is the building block of mental health. Like you have to have
Mhm.
sleep, so that's why I think that might be my longest chapter. I give so many examples, trying to get people to think of, because your own creativity will help you figure out what'll help you. So, but the
Yeah.
buffer zone is tried and true with so many students. It's where you cut off work at a certain
Mhm.
point and take a little buffer period to quiet down before you go to sleep. Because I was finding so many students are studying something really edgy in their bed, close the book and try to lay their head down, and they were not
Yeah.
falling asleep. Or they were just busy, busy, busy till 11 p.m. and then all of a sudden they can't sleep. It's like,
Yeah.
well, let's talk about how to get, and it can be a 20-minute buffer zone. It doesn't have to be too long, but it's kind of basically quieting down. I also like to recommend that folks will write out like their to-do list for the next day if they're struggling with busy thoughts. So then it lives on the list and you can say, nope, I don't need to think about it. It's on the list. Or yeah, any kind of quiet behavior. But there's a lot of right answers to this because some students are like, yeah, I watched this show. It totally calms me down. It's
Yeah.
media, but it still calms them down.
Yeah.
Then I can like get ready for bed and go to sleep. I love
Yeah.
it. If it works for you. No, it's that's what's the right answer. So
Yeah, well, I have a 14-year-old who loves Gilmore Girls and the Golden Girls for that very reason. She'll rewatch Golden Girls episodes because it's just calming and reassuring, or a lot of folks who rewatch the same episodes because they're familiar and it's comforting.
mhm,
But I stumbled on this buffer zone when I was doing my dissertation because I was dissertating, and I would have
mhm.
time in the evening, and anytime I could carve out, I would do it, and I would work right up, and then I would go to bed, and I would have dissertation nightmares all night long about the participants, about my research, about my defense, about all these things. I was like, I can't do this. So I realized I needed an hour between work, dissertation, or other things and bed. And so I needed, and sleep, right? So Daily Show,
Yeah.
basketball, low light, I find really helps me. Just anything to sort of dial that down and set aside from the doing, have a little bit of a buffer zone. It's really great. What are some of we talked about the quiet and the sleep. What are some of the other key things from the book that you want to make sure you mention in this conversation?
I guess I would like to say the way each chapter is organized, it has what the issue is, like sleep, why it's a challenge, and that why it's a challenge little section. Sometimes it's a couple paragraphs, maybe three, but it's so important because students don't believe it should be a challenge. They think they should already know.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's
easy for everybody else, I'm sure. What's wrong with me?
exactly. So that was so important for me to put in to that in itself is like validating. Yes, this is hard. It's
Mm,
hard for everybody. It's so hard. It's in this book. And then the biggest part is the strategies. So what to try. And in
mhm,
some chapters, that's essay, not essay questions, but journal questions or reflection questions. Just write a little bit about a lot of things. I have the identities. I have 3 identity section chapters, and there are a lot of essay questions. Why am I calling them essay questions? They should be journal
yeah,
prompt.
journal prompts, reflection questions. Yeah.
And then after the strategies, there's how to know if this wasn't enough. So a little bit of an assessment if something's really wrong and you need further help. And
Mm,
then the referral section starts with referrals on campus. So your dean of students office, your chaplain's office, your counseling center,
mhm,
and why you would go to the counseling center for something that wasn't going right or whatever. I tried to refer everywhere on campus, you know what I mean,
mhm. Yeah.
to make it so that people have a lot of choices. And then the last section is referrals that are off campus, like book referrals, websites. They're all logical to what the topic is. Sometimes I have movies, apps, sometimes I have apps. So that's like the way each chapter works. And the other the 6 sections mirror the main topic. So it's how to take care of your body, questions about your identity, how to deal with how to even know what you're thinking, how to practice that. Because a lot of people, our brain is like a universe in there. And how do you recognize, oh, I just had this thought and it was, you know, interesting. This is not a helpful thought to have, Students
Mhm,
were coming in all the time. I'm an idiot or whatever. Like, let's work on seeing that, acknowledging that, and then figure out what you want to do with that. And I just lay that out in my chapters. And I do the same thing for emotions, recognizing emotions, naming them. What can you do to cope with them? And then the longest section is on relationships,
mhm,
starting with like what are healthy friendships? What is a friendship? Just
mhm.
really taking it down. So for students who are like, in their late 20s, early 30s, like this, some of that stuff might not be as helpful, but for new students, it's definitely helpful. And what are boundaries? What does intimacy mean? Healthy sexuality. And then the last section is your time. So I have time management for mental health, coping with media,
Mhm.
balancing priorities. So
Yeah.
that's
It's really great. I'm reminded of, what I hear from folks is that they're seeing so many college students who don't have the skills or the confidence. And that relationships part is really focused on that. But as you're sharing all these other sections, they seem like maybe the roots of that that
yeah.
just aren't as seen, aren't as visible to other folks. And it's showing up in an inability to navigate a conflict or loneliness,
Exactly.
and needing much more support to even engage in the conflict or even talk about the loneliness or even
Right.
bring it up or even begin trying in some of those things.
Yeah. That's one of the goals of the books is to get upstream of
Yeah.
and lay out what all the basic skills are that everyone needs. And a lot of us of a certain age, we just had to learn them on our own. We just
Yeah.
figured it out like, oh, but because the world wasn't as intense in a way as it is now. And so I think spelling it out and providing more opportunities
Yeah.
to learn, um, more. explicitly these skills will be
Yeah.
helpful to our young people.
Yeah, and like we've talked about, it's these 6 sections, 35 chapters, these very specific topics. Here's what it is, here's the challenges, and a whole bunch of offerings, I'll call them. This might help, this might help. You might try this, you might try this. And then those resources is it's very useful and it seems very proactive. That people can use to not, address all of the challenges they're facing, but if a book can help eliminate 2 or 3 of the challenges, help them address them on their own and build the confidence like, oh, I did this with a little bit of help.
Mhm.
um, then it frees up maybe their counseling session to focus on things where they need even more resources and more support and more assistance navigating through there. How do you see, how do you hope, I mean, writing a book is a journey, a lot of time and a lot of energy. And I know you were imagining college students and maybe families. How do you hope individuals or even institutions utilize a book like this?
I do have a lot of hopes because something that I think all of us that have worked with college students know, there's no magic wand for having them open the book and use it. That's the one thing I can't control that.
Right.
So I would love to see the scaffolding on campus with programming around the book. Like there's just going to be I don't know what it would look like because every campus is really different, but like a book club. Let's meet and talk about this chapter, what strategies worked for you, so that to have it a place for it to be used and an excuse to open it and see that it's valued. Because I still think, we think that the stigma is lessened and it has, but it is not lessened enough where it's,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm working on my mental health. It's still a really hard thing to do and talk about. I would love to see peer-to-peer, peers using it, like the RAs having their programming and say, we're going to talk about, chapter 8 today and like bring a
Mhm.
piece of paper and well, it's all there. I've heard so much that parents are really interested in the book and campuses that can help the parents get a copy in some way so that the parents can can see, oh, I didn't realize my kid would be working on this, that this is normal. And then all of a sudden it creates a bridge to their kid, like, yeah, it is hard to know what you're thinking or what you want to do, and it takes a lot of
Yeah.
intention and so that it can create those kind of bridges between people and more discussion and having it be more front burner.
Right.
That the health skills aren't just going to happen on their own. Like we want to prioritize them and
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that's always been on my mind is how much time campuses spend being reactive to student issues, whether it's a mental health crisis, whether it's sexual violence, whether it's not doing well academically. Once a student is really struggling or maybe in crisis, we spend a lot of time and people and resources to help that student recover, hopefully. And what if we spent more time teaching them how to be successful on the front end, to be proactive? This, things like sleep, things like study habits, things like healthy relationships, to be equip them to do this well, give them skills, give them competence and confidence. Um, we would rather do that, right? When I think about my kid going off to college, I'd rather them learn how to be successful than wait for them to really be in trouble and then try and help them. It also seems really helpful for a lot of parents to see struggle is a part of the college experience. It's not a sign of failure or they're doing it wrong, but struggle with friendships is a part of the deal. Struggle with
absolutely.
managing your time is a part of the learning experience.
Mhm.
Um, Trying to find how to sleep is a part of, the growing up and some of the challenges there. So the
Absolutely.
normalizing and then parents being able to not just say, oh no, how do I fix it? But say, oh, okay, here's some things. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have these
Yeah.
things worked for you? Because
Right.
some of us know better and we don't do better. You ever notice that?
Yeah. Yeah. What is that? Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah,
A
yeah. I
little
mean,
bit.
I know good sleep habits. I don't always do them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
that's right. That's right.
there's a bridge between what we know and what we practice.
Ah, so true. I always when people would ask me, what can I do to help my kid? I'm like, take care of yourself and model
Mhm.
they're watching you like a hawk, whether they seem like they are not, you know.
Yeah.
They're they're gonna do it, you know, they're gonna watch what you're doing.
Yeah,
And
I
they're
think
gonna
that
listen to
modeling
your
is so
advice.
powerful.
It
I
is.
I had a coach say to me, I was struggling with an issue, and the coach was saying, "Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh, you say you're gonna do this. What would you want your kids to learn about this thing?" And I was like, "Oh, this, and this." Well, how are you teaching them that? By how you're doing it. And that just took my commitment to it to a whole different level. I remembering hearing the author of Brain Rules, who I'll forget his name. We'll link it in the notes. But he said the number one question he gets is, "How do I get my kid into Harvard?" And he would say, "Well, that's a terrible goal, and for all these reasons. But if you want your kid to be successful, his number one tip was have a good relationship with your partner."
Mhm.
And
Love
I just thought that was such a great thing that we get so focused on make them do this and have chores and give them allowance or don't give them allowance, right? But his number one thing you can do is model a good relationship, have a positive relationship, have a healthy relationship. Um,
Reminds me of, I love to bring up this study, and like you, I'm gonna forget the name, but it comes out of the St. Paul campus, the Family Social
mhm,
Science, where they studied the family dinner and people that
mm,
have a family dinner where they sit down and talk to each other and eat together have all these positive mental health
mhm,
and health and social outcomes.
yeah.
It's phenomenal. And so that was feel kind of linked to me, you know, that to have a dinner where everyone sits down is a healthy adult relationship.
I
And
know. I was just thinking about this yesterday about how I know that to be true. And as we're navigating soccer and track and all of these things,
really
it's
hard.
really,
How do you do it?
really hard to do. Um, well, before we move to our last question, anything else you want to be sure to mention or share here that you would think, particularly our student affairs audience, like you said, you have this behind the scenes footage, you really have the real deal that you would think would be really helpful for them to know.
One thing that's come up a lot that I think is helpful for student affairs folks to know is that they can talk to students who seem in distress because
Mhm,
much of the time they're going to be in distress about something that the the staff member has worked through on their own too. Like the topics in my book, all adult humans have dealt with these
mhm,
things. And so you have your own story embedded in all this stuff. So you can also say, yeah, of course, sleep is really hard to figure out when you're in school because you want to do it all. I worked on that too, and there's some strategies in the book if they're going to use the book, but
mhm,
so that to give non-counseling staff more
mhm,
confidence to meet students where they're at, because I think a lot of the time students are bringing in these developmental struggles that
mhm.
it feels easier to walk them over to the counseling center, but
Yeah,
they can be talked through a lot, not every time. I know that. I know there's a lot of
yeah,
extreme things, but like a lot of these things are about normal learning, and
yeah,
it's gotten more intense. And so we all need
yeah.
to pitch in for that.
I think that's really helpful to hear from someone with your experience because I think so many of us hear a student who's in crisis and we just say, well, I'm not a mental health professional, so let's schedule you at the counseling center. And I think there's some space between that where we can say, well, what is that? Because I think so many college students now are familiar and maybe a little bit more comfortable with language of mental health, taking care of my mental health, even things like anxiety. Um, and sometimes they're talking about a diagnosable thing where they need a lot more support from a mental health professional for sure. And sometimes they're saying, I'm struggling, I'm
Right.
stressed, I'm worried,
Mm,
um, I'm not doing well, I'm
mm,
having a really bad day.
mhm,
And rather than say that, it can be easier, or they're familiar with other people saying, oh, I'm having a mental health issue, right? And so what does that mean in unpacking? Because I think some of that language in really good ways has been destigmatized and normalized, but then sometimes it also, what comes with that is maybe a little overuse, or a little, not overuse, but broadly used some of that language, and giving permission for student affairs folks to not just refer to the counseling center every time there's a student struggling, but to really engage and do that. Because I don't know any college campus who has more than enough mental health counselors or more than enough appointment times, right? Everybody's got a wait list.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, I think that's how it's going to have to go on all our
Mhm.
campuses, is that we all embrace this, and I hope we do, because our kids our students are hurting, and if everyone can be that kind listening ear, just say, hey, what's going on? Yeah, I can handle listening to, yes. I
Yeah,
also
yeah.
struggled with this. Here's some strategies that you can try. Um, boy,
You're also modeling not being a know-it-all, but being relatable. Oh, I know how hard that is.
yeah,
I struggle with this, or I still struggle with that, right? And
right.
connecting rather than, well, what you should do is A, B,
Yeah,
and C, right?
no.
I think that
And I
approach is really good.
really, really tried hard not to do that in my book. Like, yes, we all need sleep, but also, yes, there's a million right answers to how you do it so that you get what you need. So I tried to thread that needle.
Yeah. Well, and let's just point out that if more folks can sort of help the students who are having what you're calling these sort of normally developmental challenges and struggles, it frees up time for the students who really do need a mental health professional and can be there and can maybe not have to wait 3 weeks for that appointment, but maybe wait a week for that. And so really helping make sure the resources get to those who most need it. And that really varies individually. Um, well, we're running a bit out of time, and we always like to end with what are you thinking, pondering, troubling, noodling now? And the book is out and it's available, but you wrote it a while ago. So I'd love to hear, having written a book and published it and signed off on it and edited the proof copies, and now you're having conversations like this and Good Morning America, which we'll link to in the show notes and other places. I'd love to hear what you're thinking now about some of these things, maybe something that you would add, or maybe something that's already is in the book that you think is just more important than ever now that I'm talking about it with others.
I that's a big, broad question. I mean, it did take me 15 years to write the book because I needed all the examples
Yeah.
of
I
my day
spent
to day.
15 years not writing a book, so good for you.
So I mean, I feel like, oh, it took that amount of time to get what I needed in there. And yeah, I'm surprised still at how many young people are hurting
Mm,
and need more. So that weighs on me. And I just, I'm glad that my book finally, after
yeah,
so long, did come out. I guess that what keeps popping into my head is the loneliness epidemic, which most people in higher ed should be aware of. It's
mm,
huge news, and the Surgeon General has written about it, and how our students are, and really our whole society is lonely. So how can we help help them connect? I mean,
yeah,
I give a lot of strategies in my book for relationships, and communication and all that stuff. Like, that's good. That's in the book, but it's certainly has to be done in real time with people becoming face to face. So that worries me, that people are further apart, and obviously that's mirrored in our society where things are so
yeah,
divisive.
yeah.
And
Not just college students.
no, no,
Yep.
that's a big one.
Well, we've got a lot of things we'll put in the show notes, from where to buy the book and the Good Morning America and some other things. If folks want to connect with you, where can they do that?
I have a website that's my name, mianosanow.com. And I do have an Instagram that I started just a little while ago. I'm trying to put helpful things on there, and that's at College Mental Health Guide.
Mhm.
And if someone wants to write me an email, I'm totally open to that. It's my name, Mia Nosanow, author, all one word, at Gmail. So that's my places.
That's great. Well, like I said, we're going to get lots of links and things in the show notes, and you're working with some campuses to sort of to get discounts or provide books for incoming students and things like that. Do you want to add any more about that possibility?
Yes, campuses are, quite a few campuses have bought copies for their student life staff to get to know and see how they might want to use it with students, or what kind of programming they might want to do. And there's a great discount on the book. There's a 50% discount. So, and with free shipping to people that buy more than 25 copies at once to give out to their staff. So you can contact me at that Mia Nosanow author at Gmail account and get you hooked up with that.
Great. So with student life staff, with incoming students, with parents and families, lots of great opportunities to connect.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Mia. It's great to see you again, and thank you for being here
Yes.
and connecting and sharing all these years of experience. I feel like we kind of got the 20 plus years of counseling sort of download here super quickly. So thanks for the book, thanks for your work, and thanks for caring for college students.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to our sponsors of today's episode, Rutledge and Huron. Rutledge, Taylor and Francis is the world's leading academic publisher in education, publishing a wide range of books, journals, and other resources for practitioners, faculty, administrators, and researchers. They welcome Stylus Publishing to their publishing program and are thrilled to enrich their offerings in higher education, teaching, student affairs, professional development, assessment, and more. They're a proud sponsor of Student Affairs Now. View their complete catalog of education titles at rutledge.com/education. And Huron is a global professional services firm that collaborates with clients to put possible into practice by creating sound strategies, optimizing operations, accelerating digital transformation, and empowering businesses and their people to own their future. By embracing diverse perspectives, encouraging new ideas, and challenging the status quo, Huron creates sustainable results for the organizations they serve. As always, a huge shout out to our producer, Natalie Ambrosi, who does all the behind the scenes work to make us look and sound good. We love the support of these important conversations from our community. Thanks to all of you, and we invite you to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe on YouTube, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, where you get a free announcement each Wednesday morning of our newest episode. If you're so inclined, you can leave us a 5-star review. It helps these conversations reach a larger audience. I'm Keith Edwards. Thanks to our fabulous guest today, and to everyone who is watching and listening. Make it a great week.